Tarik, formerly of CLG, OpTic Gaming, has joined OpTic, and he is replacing the player Stanislaw. Now, OpTic as a team, I'm going to use the same usual approach. You look at the team, you look at who they removed, was that justified? You look at who they've added, was that the right move? You look at the aftermath. So as a team, for me, this core of OpTic really only begins when they removed Shazam in April and they added in Mixwell, the Spanish player formerly of G-Bots, because Mixwell's been the best player in the team. The team's actual danger and threat on LAN has really improved since then, and they've come close to some good performances. They've never really closed out like a big deep run or anything. And so for me, I think at one point in time coming into the major, I think it was legit. I had them as the best NA team. Now by a small margin and only in like a placeholder manner. I mean, an even more placeholder extreme case of that than when CLG was the number one team in NA for me, which was purely just because Team Liquid didn't have a proper roster most of the time. C9 was dying off since they had no Sean Gares. So I had them as the best NA team coming into the major, but only in as much as they had some solid single map upsets. Team Liquid hadn't yet had their run to the final, and obviously that lineup doesn't really exist anymore without their best player, Simple. And C9 was in a bad state, hadn't even qualified for the major. CLG was a train wreck. I mean, there wasn't really anyone else you could put forwards. And so what made them the best NA team overall was, once they got Mixwell in, they had that Gfinity event very soon afterwards, which was pretty underwhelming, to be honest. That was the one where I think they lost to... Who would it have been? Can't have been Splice. I know they beat them. Who else was in their group? Another NA team, I forget anywhere. Oh, maybe Hellraisers, actually. Could just be Hellraisers. I know they've lost to Virtus Pro. So that one was underwhelming, but it was so early on. They went to the Season 3 finals of EPL, and that was the one where they beat Astralis, and that was actually Astralis with their old lineup, the classic lineup, so that was kind of a shocking result, but legit on the side of the guys from OpTic. They won the Americas Minor. They beat Tempo Storm there, which is pretty legit overall. There's all the best Americas teams, except obviously Liquid and CLG were already qualified for the major. Then E-League, they took NIP to 3 games in the semi-final of the group. Pretty legit. They beat NIP on, I think it was on Train. I think Cobblestone was a close game. They qualified for the major. At the major, unfortunately, that was a bad result. They finished last place there, mainly due to map pool. Like NAP, for example, very cleverly just banned out all of the maps that OpTic play. Now, the thing with OpTic is, ultimately, the maps that they're very legit on is Cobblestone and Train. But outside of those, which admittedly most teams play at least one of those and will allow it through. Outside of those, though, the map pool does get pretty thin, and that's what we saw at the major. So, OpTic, okay, but obviously easily superseded if any NA team becomes really good, such as Team Liquid did at the last major. Now, in terms of them removing Stanislaw, now they said their reasoning was that they did so because he wanted to lurk, but so did NAF, and so they picked NAF over him, and obviously, and some sort of out of the game conflicts also meant that they decided to remove Stanislaw. Now, I actually think, if you ask me to speculate and looking at the actions that have happened here, this looks like another instance to me where, unless there was some really bad personality conflict, I think this is another instance of players in North America valuing raw individual skill and aim over the other aspects of being a player. Team play, understanding of the game, consistency in performance, being able to play a role within a system. Because to me, Stanislaw is a better player than NAF. Now, in terms of raw skill, I'll give the edge to NAF. I think he can sometimes be a crazy AWPer. His aim sometimes looks really nuts. Sometimes it looks very average. He's very inconsistent as a player and ultimately hasn't had many big LAN performances against international competition. But he has the odd map, the odd half where he does go off and you think, wow, this NAF guy is pretty skilled, right? He's pretty good. It's been the same ever since he was in the old teams. Denial, the Team Liquid, they were later called, obviously. A bunch of these different teams he's been in, you've looked at it and thought, right, this guy's a skilled player, clearly. But if you ask me who was the better player out of Stanislaw and NAF, I'd say Stanislaw. Like, I look at Stanislaw, I thought he was one of the better players in this team. Like, for me, the standout star of OpTic is obviously Mixwell, because he's a very skilled individual player, and he seems to have nerves under pressure. Then you go to Rush, he can have a huge impact as an entry fragger, one of the better entries in North America, I think. Then after that, it was Stanislaw for me, because for me, Stanislaw looked like a more all-around player, looked much more versatile, looked pretty consistent overall. Not like a really skilled player, so he's not going to have massive highs, but he's pretty consistent, does his job, seems to have a solid idea about how to team play within the scene. So as a result, if you ask me to pick between the two as a lurker, I would definitely have picked Stanislaw. I think that makes more sense to me as an outsider as to who I'd want as my lurker. But again, maybe personality conflicts were a bigger issue here. So once you've decided to remove Stanislaw, now when it comes to the fact of, and we're going to add Tarik, okay, if it's a choice only between Stanislaw and Tarik, yeah, I'll go with Tarik here, actually. Because, I mean, first and foremost, I saw a recent tweet, actually, which actually kind of sums up how I think about roster moves and whether a team should make them. Because most people look at a team and they go, oh, but sometimes they have great games. I love to watch them play, so don't make a roster move. Or they go, oh, you came close last time, so don't make a roster move. Or, oh, I see so much potential in this team one day. Don't make a roster move. But for me, none of those are reasons to keep players or to not make a roster move. The best way to do it, and this guy laid it out very simply, and it's actually how I model it as well. So I wonder if that's why he tweeted it at me. When you're a team, you've got to have one of these three, if not more than one of these three, going for you. You've got to have good form. If you've got good form, okay, maybe don't make a roster move. You've got to be improving. If you are legitimately improving in a way that's really tangible and you can see step to step how the improvement's going and a line going upwards, okay, then maybe don't make a roster move because we haven't seen where the improvement's going to end. Or third, if you have peaks of form that are really sick. Like even if you're not doing that well, you're not improving much, but you have the odd tournament where suddenly you just do super, super sick, then great, maybe don't make a change in case that can somehow stabilize over time or you get through your problems and now you're having the peak all the time. Most teams don't have any of those three factors and yet do stay with the same line. Like a good example to me, obviously, with the Envious. Envious doesn't have any of them. They don't have good form. They aren't improving much. They keep changing shot all the time. And their peaks actually aren't that sick at the moment. They have very, very rarely having them. So there's a team that obviously should change roster if they had the ability to. So I think in this sense, OpTic were a team, a candidate to change players. So now when it comes to bringing in Tarik, the good thing here is, one thing that OpTic did lack a bit, in my opinion, was some firepower, some skill. So bringing in Tarik is a great addition because he's a very skilled player for North American players. Of the North American players, I'd have him top 5 in terms of raw skill and in terms of what he can actually do in a server. This guy's very skilled, he's good with both rivals, and he can even be like a secondary AWP at times and be very skilled in that particular sense. I think he's just one of the best players in North America in terms of actual raw skill. Now, he doesn't always get it into his performance, which has been the big issue for me. CLG has really struggled over his time there to find the right role for him. He got pretty good around MLG Columbus. He was legit around that point in time. The rest of the time, he's been good against the North Americans. He's repeatedly shit the bed at majors and against European teams. He's never quite lived up to what we can see. It's not potential in the sense of like, oh, I imagine one day he could play. We know he can play this well. He just doesn't do it very often against the Europeans. So I feel like it's a role issue there and a mentality issue for him, knowing like I'm going to apply myself to this role that would be best for me, not the role I want to play that would be comfortable, I think I want to play, and I think I would be the best at. So the issues with Tarik have been mainly mental. Skills, much better than Stanislaw. In fact, I'd say better than pretty much everyone in OpTic. In fact, I might even say he's better than Mixwell because I haven't seen enough of Mixwell still. He's only played a few months and had a few lands. I think Tarik actually might be more skilled. Admittedly, Mixwell's done it against Europeans, which I'll give him credit for and is a lot more legit. So I think adding Tarik is great in that particular sense and definitely can add the firepower you need. So the aftermath of the team is they've just lost Devil Walk, who'd only been there briefly as the coach because of obviously the coaching issues, and now he's gone elsewhere apparently. They get more firepower, certainly from Tarik. I mean, apparently the roles now is that it will be Rush and Tarik on entry. I think that's a great combo because Rush is a dedicated entry fragger. Then you put him with a guy like Tarik, who really should be in that kind of Forest second man in entry role where he just cleans up using sick aim and is going to be a bit aggressive but doesn't want to be the first guy in and get killed. I think that can be a great pairing there. That could really bring Tarik out of his shell in the same way that Elige kind of unlocked Nitro at the end of 2015 in Team Liquid. Mixwell as the AWP is obvious. He's the best player. He's the best AWPer on the team. Daps as the in-game leader is support because, first of all, he's fucking fairly crap individual player, but seems to have a pretty decent brain on him for a North American player, seems to know how to team play within teams and set things up and get a system going. And so as a result, if you have to be inside the game to be the in-game leader, which you do apparently at the moment thanks to Valve, he's a player who should have some solid value to him and can be a decent enough player in that particular sense and just do his job with skilled players around him. And then Naf as the lurker, which, okay, I mean, I've said reasons why I might have chosen Stanislaw, but okay, he's a decent enough player. And let's see if putting him in that position unlocks him more, because he does seem like a player who wants to set up those scenarios for himself and not necessarily go in and just have to take what the game gives to him in that scenario. He wants to create the situation he wants. So maybe that unlocks him and he's got enough skill elsewhere that he doesn't have to be a sick performer. Now, I do think a key aspect here, like I mentioned before, is working around Tarik. You've got to harness his skills and get him have an impact, integrate them into the game. But you've also got to integrate him into the team. You've got to get his role set so that it's not impacting other people negatively and that other people are facilitating him to be the best that he can be. If you can do that, then I think you can be very good. The problem is, as I've kind of referenced, that's been very rarely done over this guy's career. Now, I also do hope that we see a rise in form from Tarik, back to where he was earlier this year, primarily because he should be happier now. I mean, this is a guy who had moves to Cloud9, had moves to Team Liquid, on the air, up in the air, on the table, other teams saying they wanted to do it, asking to make it happen, and CLG spiked those moves, squashed them, told them you're under contract, it's not happening, or set ridiculous buyouts, wouldn't even talk about it. Like, all these problems that would demotivate you and that would put you in a position where you're like, fuck, I play with this team all this time and they're just going to do this to my career, when they themselves aren't helping me out and putting better players around me to succeed when I'm at my prime. So I feel like this is a good move for both parties, should make both more motivated. I do see a small issue with the guys from OpTic, which is that in gaining more firepower, if Tarik goes nuts, sure, he's skilled enough that he can make up for anything Stanislaw could have added. But if he has any of his issues like he had in CLG, I think they might lack for some of the routine, some of the consistency that I saw Stanislaw bringing to their game. I thought he was a pretty solid player, kind of an underrated player, actually, in a team which obviously isn't really filled with star names. So I thought he was always a legit guy. Oh, and I'll probably just put, as a final note to add in, like, where should this put OpTic at the moment? Like I said, to me, they were only the best NA team as a placeholder while everyone else was having issues or getting their rosters together. I think at the moment, if OpTic plays well with Tarik, I do think that they could be like the... what would be reasonable? I think they can still... I think they could be the second best NA team. I think the best NA team on paper should be Team Liquid if things work out. I think the second best can be OpTic, but I think OpTic and C9 should certainly be battling for that spot. I'm really unsure about what's going to happen with teams like CLG, for example, Splice. These ones, it's very hard to get a read on whatsoever because the rosters are just so wild. So I'll have to say at the moment, I think OpTic should be second or third in NA and definitely can contend for second, because I haven't been that... I'm kind of underwhelmed by C9's pickup. I don't think they've addressed a lot of their issues, unfortunately, especially now they've got the whole Slemmy in-game leader issue. So I think OpTic can be second best. It's going to be hard to beat out Team Liquid with the roles that they seem to have fixed there and their skills. So as a result, if you're the second best NA team, realistically, you should be able to one day maybe get a top 8, top 9 rating in the world. You should be able to make it out of the group at a major one day. You should be able to make the deep run at the odd individual tournament. Now, obviously, for OpTic, they need to expand their map pool. Bringing in Tarik, a guy who's played a lot of Cobblestone, that helps. Should help Cobblestone remain a good map for them. But they got to get some other maps in that pool, especially like another custom, if you ask me. You got to get something like Overpass. I mean, you can't say Nuke, can you? So Overpass has got to be one that you've got to at least consider. Something at Mirage, maybe. This map, obviously, Tarik has a lot of history playing. I think that's where they've got to expand, but I think the future is good for them. And I think they can improve a decent amount of this. Not massively to become some world beaters, that's not going to happen, but they can improve decently off this.